The following program is a PodcastOne.com production. From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Now, here's Steve Austin.
I'm talking to Phil Keoghan. He's sitting right across the table from me at 317 Gimmick Street. That is my podcast location, Phil.
I love it.
Hey, man, award-winning host of an award-winning show, The Amazing Race.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about the documentary you just made, and you recreated the 1928 Tour de France. And you being from New Zealand, which we caught on record here.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was a few of the reasons, or one of the reasons, you decided to recreate this to the 3 Australian guys and 1 New Zealander,
Yep.
who were the first English-speaking people the first English-speaking people to participate in a Tour de France.
It was the first English-speaking team. I found out that there were some English-speaking riders, in fact, a couple of Australians, no New Zealanders, but there were some Australians that went and rode. I guess back in the day, and the Tour de France started in 1903. Amazing history, like incredible history, this race. It was started by a guy by the name of Henri de Grange, and he came up with this idea for the race as a way to sell a newspaper, really, because he thought, hey, I can take this race out around France. People will want to follow it in the newspapers or go to all these little towns. And I just have been, over the years, become so fascinated with these athletes, and I'm always fascinated with people. I mean, you're somebody like that. You know, people who take it to extreme when it comes to physicality, mental toughness, just going to the borders of pain and suffering. I don't know what it is about it. There's something about it that really fascinates me. I love where people have gone, what people are prepared to do in order to achieve something. And so when I read this book about the first English-speaking team and this one New Zealand guy who I'd never heard of, and 3 guys from Australia, I'd heard of Sir Hubert Opperman, but I hadn't heard of the other 2. And then I realized that they'd traveled halfway around the world to go take on what many consider to be the toughest sporting event on earth. I was like, man, this is such an interesting story. Like, complete underdogs turn up in Europe against the best riders in the world who looked down at them because they were from some country way down at the bottom of the world. Like, what are you doing here?
They didn't think they had a chance.
Not a chance in hell. Not a chance in hell. And even their equipment, like the bikes they were riding, they were antiquated by European standards, because in Europe they had the latest, greatest, even though those bikes were super heavy in 1928. When the Australians turned up, their bikes were way antiquated compared to what the French had.
Right.
So they turn up, they see these guys, and they were like, come on, please, what are you doing here?
Yeah, but let's tell a little backstory here, because the director on my show, Broken Skull Challenge, you and him are good friends.
Yes.
So you came out to our set. And I met you, what was it, a year or 2 ago?
It's about a year ago.
So you'd already ridden this.
And I love your show, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And that's part of the reason I wanted to come out was, again, I've always been fascinated by people being tested. And I love following your show. And I love your attitude towards them. And the thing that makes that show work to me is that you are a legit tough guy who has put your body on the line for many, many years. So when you are telling these people, hey, dig in, go deeper, you got this, it's real, it's legit. It's you are the real deal. And the show, it comes across that way. And, man, you have had some matchups that just are so captivating.
Yeah, and it was, I guess that, when I came up with the idea for the show, just due to my background with athletics and then my background in professional wrestling, I mean, tough is tough. It's a different kind of tough. I don't submit myself to the WODs or the Spartan races or the obstacle course racers, the stuff that those guys do, but a career that was built on toughness. And from what I'd seen on TV, I thought this would be something that I would want to host. And so we pitched it to CMT. They said, hey, man, we really like it, so we're out there doing it. But you came out to visit the set. We started talking about, you riding over there, and we started talking about some of the shortcuts guys were taken back then in 1928 to help them perform during the tour. And I want to cover some of those, but that's when you and I first met. And when you told me those stories, I was like, God dang, here's the thing, man. I'm 52 years old. Everybody knows about the Tour de France. Everybody knows how tough it is.
Well,
I thought I did, but I really didn't. After watching your documentary, watching you ride it from now on, and the tour's going on right now, as you know, but I'm following it, and I'll follow it from here on out because from the footage of what I saw you guys with the old footage that you put interspersed with what you guys were doing, I'm like, man, I'm hooked because I had no idea that those guys were riding on dirt roads, gravel roads, whatever, way back in the day with the gear system. If they wanted to change gears, they'd have to take the wheel off the back of the bike, change it by hand. It's not like today's technology that everybody's riding, but just how tough it was. And then seeing the distance, a couple of those, what was the longest segment? Was 217 miles?
We had seven stages over 200, but 200 miles. So the bikes, to start off with, the bikes are twice as heavy as a modern bike. Like you said, they have no gears. They're heavy steel bikes. We decided that we would retrace the tour on the same type of bike, right? So going from riding a modern bike and then going and riding one of these bikes, ergonomically, they're not very comfortable. I couldn't get really set up properly. I had a frame that was too small for me because they used to ride with the seat post maybe just an inch and a half off the top tube. I had mine built maybe 8 inches because I'm quite tall. I'm about 6 foot tall. And I was a sprinter at school. You know, I played rugby. I was like the equivalent of a wide receiver. I could run really fast. I wasn't a very big guy, but I could go fast. And I was short burst, short distance kind of a guy, kind of a little wiry kind of fellow. Not somebody who I never imagined I would be riding 7 stages over 200 miles. But the thing of those 7 stages over 200 miles was not so much the distance, it was the altitude that we were climbing. So when you're climbing, one stage we had the death stage, it's called. It was 200 and something miles, but it was 20,000 vertical feet. So when you're moving up a mountain at 5 miles an hour and you're climbing hour after hour and you realize you've ridden 2 hours and done 10 miles and you've got to do 200, it messes with your head. So one of the things that fascinates me about any sport and about just toughness in general, and you know, I've been working on working up a show since 2006, which is really based more around mental toughness. I'm more fascinated with mental toughness than I am with how strong someone is, how fit they are, you know, what amazing athletic things they can do. Their dexterity and their agility. I'm much more interested in the mental toughness side of people. So Diana Nyad, you know, the woman, 65 years old, swims from Cuba to America. She's in the water, you know, oh God, I didn't even know how many hours that was total, but 65 years old. There's a guy in the water swimming with her who can't take the jellyfish stings. She keeps going. It's her 5th attempt over a period of decades. And she comes out of the water swimming. Now, is she stronger than most guys? No. Is she fitter? Not necessarily. She's fit. But it's the mental toughness thing. So the Tour de France, and what I've always been fascinated with, is just these guys go to a place mentally that is so far beyond anything that mere mortals can imagine. I wanted to dabble a little bit in that. I wanted to go to that place. And that's what really drew me to tell the story from the inside, meaning push my body to a point where I just did not know. Wow, I was hallucinating, actually. I wasn't even in a place of being able to register whether I should stop or not, you know. But I love that the human spirit and that drive that humans have to just keep going, that mental toughness side, that to me is the difference between a good athlete and an amazing athlete.
Quick question before we get back onto the journey. You got online to try to find the bicycle that you were going to ride.
Yeah.
The only $ question I'll ask you is, how much did you have to pay for the 1928 bike?
Well, that's a really good question. So the bikes that the Australasian team rode there's this very rare bike called a Rava Wonder bike. They don't make the bikes anymore, and it was a very small French company. I wanted to ride the same bike that the New Zealander Harry Watson rode in 1928. That, to me, was like the perfect storyline. I go find the bike. I pull that bike out of storage, get it checked, redo the bearings. I get on the same bike, and I ride the same miles, and it does another tour. And I'm really close to him, you know, because he's passed away in 1996. I searched for that bike for 2 years. there was an earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. The last time it was seen was in an old bike store in New Zealand. And after the earthquake, 80% of the CBD, the Central Business District in Christchurch, was demolished. And so they lost track of the bike. And I kept following all these dead ends. I just could not find the bike. So finally, I find out that there's a guy in France who has this extraordinary bike collection. And one of the bikes he has is a 1928 rabbit bike. This is like hen's teeth. Because hen don't have teeth, I guess. But this is like a rare bicycle. So I start communicating with the guy online. Now, he thinks I want the bike because I want to get the bike and sell it. So I start explaining using Google Translate to go take my English to French. No. I'm going to ride the bike around France, 3,338 miles. I'm going to ride it. And then I don't hear from him. He must have thought, who is this crazy guy? Like, what is he talking about? He's going to ride.
So you didn't put, hey, man, this is Phil. I'm the guy that hosts the Amazing Race. I want to do this documentary.
He didn't know. Right. Like, he just gets some random email from some guy who's some New Zealand guy living in America who says he's going to ride the bike around. Yeah. I mean, he must have thought, this guy's a crazy guy. Like, of all the stories I've ever heard of somebody trying to get one of my bikes, really? Yeah. You're going to ride? Right. Okay. So I keep going after this guy and going. And finally, he gets frustrated with me because I would, for every 3 emails I sent to him, I'd get one back. Finally, he goes, I need you to speak to a friend of mine who speaks English. So I get on the phone with this young kid and I explain to the kid, listen, I'm not kidding here. I really am doing this, and I would love to ride the bike. I'm happy to even just borrow the bike. I'll give it back to him, but I really would love to ride this bike. So the kid realizes that I'm legit. I'm going to do this. So then the communication starts again, and over a period of a year, back and forth and back and forth. Finally, he says, if you want the bike, if you're really serious about wanting the bike, you got to come and see me in France.
Jesus.
So I fly to France, and I go with my family. And a few years ago, I rode from here in Santa Monica to New York, 100 miles a day,
right across
raising money for MS. And so I have a movie and I have a DVD. So I send the movie ahead of time to him for him to watch because I want him to know I'm legit. I'm like I got a shot at this, and I'm doing it for good reasons. I'm coming from a good place. So we go to his house. We're not allowed to tell anybody where he lives. We can't. I tell him we're going to be filming, but he doesn't want us to show anybody where he lives because of this extraordinary collection. It's priceless. You saw in the film how many beautiful bikes are there. So we turn up at the house. The nicest guy, Jean-Paul, and he invites us in. We have tea. We sit down, and then his wife, they've seen the film, so they know that we're genuine. We sit down, we have tea, and he's taking his time, man. He wants to know. And then when he shows me the bike, I can't believe it. It's so beautiful. It's after all these years of searching for the bike, and I'm blown away by the bike. And then you see in the film, we go out for a little test ride. And the bike is, really unstable and then wobbly. And anyway, by the time we left there, he wanted to give me that bike, Steve. I mean, he was so enamored by the idea of the audacity of what we were going to do. Yeah. He wanted to give me the bike. So I did pay him, and I paid him a fair price, a good price. And I felt, because I had to. There was no way I was going to do that. And if he'd said to me, by the way, you can use the bike but bring it back. So we got the bike, and then, of course, I got so paranoid checking the bike out of Charles de Gaulle because I've had luggage lost out of there before, and I thought, man, I hope nobody opens this bike and sees what's in there because this is a beautiful bike. And then when we got to L.A., I got these bike mechanic guys to check the bike over because that's the other thing I worried about. It's so old, more than 85 years old at the time. Imagine you're out there going down, screaming down these mountains at 50 miles an hour, and the frame breaks. Yeah. That'd be a horrible end to the...
Well, then the brakes are bad enough, but then when you were ended up going through the gears and the crankshaft, you ended up with one more ball bearing.
Yeah. Well, my buddy Ben found his bike online. So I rode with this guy, Ben Cornell, who's super strong. He's done an Ironman, and he's a physiotherapist. And
I was wondering what Ben did.
I beg your pardon?
I was wondering what Ben did.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah,
and he's got that mental toughness. He would, like he would fall over off the bike before he ever gave up. And I needed a guy like that with me. Like I had to have no doubt that who I was going with would put their body into this like me and mentally just commit to whatever happens, we're doing this. Like we're not going to give up on each other.
Did he do the ride across America with you?
He did, yeah.
So what did he say when you said, hey man, I want this, or this is what I'm thinking, because you've been working on this idea for a long time.
Yeah.
So what did he say when you pitched him?
Well, Ben, I have some good friends. The cameraman, Scott, who sat on the motorbike backwards shooting, no matter what I say to him, how crazy it is, he'll go, when do we leave? And my other friend, Ben, is the same way. It's like, all right, let's do it. So you know how there's some people and you say to them, hey, what about we go why don't we go climb Mount McKinley? There's some guys, when they say yes, they mean yes. And then there's other guys that are like, you're having a couple of beers, like, yeah, let's go climb Mount McKinley. And then Monday you call them and they go, did I say I was going to climb? Man, I can't do that. I'm not in any shape for that. But when Ben or my friend Scott, when they say yes to something, it's like that with my dad too, that's a handshake. That's like, okay. So I said it to Ben and Ben was like, yep. And so I needed to have somebody with me who was going to go through what I knew was going to be torturous. I don't think either one of us realized just how torturous. Or the risk that we were taking. We threw everything in. Everything was on the table, because when you've committed that much money and that much time, when we were up in the Pyrenees, and if we'd fallen, broken a collarbone, which would have been an easy thing to do, that would have been it. Right. So what we set out to do, sticking to the same schedule, the same hours, the same miles, that's going through the same towns. But it was about halfway through. I said to Ben, man, we can't afford to fall, because that's it. This whole thing will be over in flash,
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
Guys, what is up? My name's Tom Schwartz. Some of you might know me from Vanderpump Rules. We had 11 wonderful, beautiful, strange seasons together. You've seen me at some of my worst, and now I want to show you some of my best. Welcome to my new show, Detox Retox, on PodcastOne. So what are we doing here? Well, we're striving for balance in an ever-extreme world. Each week we celebrate the dance between indulgence and moderation, and I want to level up together, and I don't want to feel bad about feeling good. It's all about harmony, okay? Through conversations and travels, friends, your favorite reality stars, internet personalities, experts, amateurs, metaphysics to mezcal, highly experiential. It's going to be a nice blend of practical and fantastical. It's not woo-woo if it works. So we're going to open up our minds with fascinating humans from all walks of life. You're a little reminder that it's never too late to start fresh and find harmony. New episodes of Detox Retox with me, Tom Schwartz, drop every Tuesday. Come vibe with us, and remember to rate, review, and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Steve Austin Show.
How did you fit all this in between, hosting The Amazing Race and doing this project? Because, it seems like this was just an extremely long process to try to navigate the system, come up with a game plan, coordinate everything, get everybody over, get assembled. Hell, you had a hard time just getting out of the gate.
Yeah, getting out of the gate.
And then Ben's bike got lost.
Yeah, but Ben's bike got lost. And look, sometimes, one of my favorite quotes is anything new and different is most susceptible to market research. Malcolm Gladwell says that in his book. He wrote Tipping Point. But I always refer to that quote, because sometimes when you try something new and different, there's people that make safe choices in life, and then there are people that make really big, bold choices. When President Kennedy said we will go to the moon, there were people who thought, there's not a hope in hell we're going to the moon. But there's just some people that have an inner belief that anything is possible. Was it Mandela said, and I don't want to butcher his quote, but he was talking about the fact that anything is possible if you believe it. Again, I'm butchering the quote. But the point being, I love surrounding myself with people who believe in the impossible. And there are a lot of people who make safe decisions because they're comparing the opportunity with something that's come before, meaning they need proof that if you're going to try something new and different, that there's some kind of insurance that show that you pitch. Broken Skull Ranch, you were trying something new and different, right? There would have been people like, well, what's it like? Well, it's not like Ninja, and it's not like anything. It's your idea. You had a vision. You went for it. You drove for it. You made it work. You owned it. It was yours. It was new and it was different. And thankfully, people around you believed in you, and you need that, right? And you made a success out of your show. So you have to surround yourself with believers, and thankfully, the people around me believed in me. But it would have been an impossible show to sell. You go in and you say, oh, I've got this idea for a film. Oh, yeah, what is it? Well, I'm going to get a 1928 Tour de France bike that weighs twice as much as a modern bike. I'm going to retrace a 1928 Tour de France, every mile, every road, going to go through all the same towns. Will you give me some money to go do it? Hell no. Are you nuts? What happens if you fall? Well, I haven't really thought that out. So the only way that this film got done was sometimes it's like Henny Penny, where they're making the bread. Sometimes you just got to go make the bread, and then when the bread's being in the oven and it starts to smell good, people come a-calling and go, hey, can I have some of that bread? But they don't want to help you grind up the wheat in the beginning. So my mom, my dad, my wife and producing partner, my best friend Scott, who sat on a motorbike 3,338 miles backwards, how he held focus in the middle of the night, shooting 23 hours. You and I, we've picked up a camera before. We know what it's like to look through a viewfinder. 23 and a half hours shooting straight, and the guy's still in focus.
Y'all filmed the entire thing.
Yeah.
How many hours of footage did you end up with?
We ended up with
crazy.
Hundreds of hours. Yeah, we cut it down to a 90-minute film, but yeah, hundreds of hours.
You could have made it another 20, 30 minutes. I was totally hooked.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Sometimes less is more, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. But we really we had the right team. But I will tell you, my mom and my dad, I couldn't have done it without them. It was incredibly grassroots on one hand, but then very groundbreaking on the other. The first documentary feature to use a 4K camera. Angenieux Lenses gave us or loaned us over $400,000 worth of beautiful glass to use. So it was a film of extremes. It was like Mom and Dad are helping out. My mom's doing the nutrition and my dad's driving the truck. And then over here we got the latest, greatest technology. In the end, when we got out on the road, the thing that we didn't factor, Ben and I didn't factor, was, well, what happens when you take my dad, who's in his 70s, and he's driving a truck for 17 miles an hour, 12, 15 hours a day? What happens to that person? He can't train for that. But how hard would that be for anybody to just sit and drive a car at that speed?
I never thought about it till you brought it up in a documentary because, like you said, they're going a couple of miles an hour all day long. All night long.
And so we got to about the fourth or fifth day, and you saw in the film, and there was a whole other film about making the film.
Yeah.
We didn't put it in the film because it would have detracted from the main story, which wasn't even about us. It was about the team from 1928. But we got to a point one day, we woke up and Ben said, Phil, he said, you're in charge here, but let me tell you, you got to let everybody sleep in today, and we got to get up early, and you and I are just going to ride with no camera, no support. Let's do it old school. Let's just leave. We'll get 100 miles under our belts and let them sleep in, get up and have a good breakfast, because we were in a situation where we were going to have a mutiny, meaning the tension and the stress and the sleep deprivation was really getting to people.
How did you deal with that?
Well,
because you're so locked in to that mental process that you're talking about?
This was the hardest part of it, and you'll understand this because you've been a person who's been in front of the camera, and you can't bring any of that stress to your work, but there's always stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So you're making a film, right? And as a storyteller, I need to stop and meet people, and I need to tell certain elements of the story to tell the story. The other part of your brain is going, I got to ride 200 miles. I got a really tired crew. Every time I stop, 4 minutes I stop, I lose a mile on the road. So what am I? It's like a domino effect. It's like I have to stop. It's like you're caught in a catch-22 because I got to stop. I got to tell the story, but at the same time, I'm an athlete and I got to keep going. And then when you stop, your body cools down. Now you get back on a bike, and we're talking an average of 150 miles a day, and it's hard to put that into perspective for some people. But even on a modern bike, 150 miles a day, day after day after day after day, for 3,338 miles in a 26-day period, that's taxing on the body. I mean, that takes you to another place. And so, and I'm, when I did it, I was a 46-year-old guy. I mean, so, so like, I was twice the age of these guys from 1928.
In the documentary towards the end, I guess it was about when you guys were rolling credits, it was a picture of the two, was it Harry Watson?
Yeah, and Sir Hubert Opperman.
And Hubert Opperman. Before the race, after the race, they were just covered in dirt. It looked like those guys had aged 10 years in about 30 days. It was unbelievable. It looked like it'd been to hell and back.
Yeah, and they really had, and that's the part that I find so fascinating about the Tour and the Tour history. What sport on earth have you ever seen where a guy will be ripping down a hill wearing basically underwear, lycra, fall off at 50, 60 miles an hour, get torn to shreds, and his first instinct is get back on the bike and keep going because he doesn't want to miss the time cut. It is an insane sport. I don't want to point the finger at one particular sport, but, you see these guys playing soccer sometimes, and then you see the replay. They haven't even been touched, or maybe they've been tapped. Yeah. And they're on the ground rolling around, faking it, doing a Hollywood. I'm like, dude. And you could look at a cyclist, and some of these guys are a $130, $135, the best climbers.
Right.
Contrasted with maybe the biggest guy might be maximum 175. That would be max. And that's a big rider. But these guys are tough mentally and physically. I don't know if you saw a few years ago, there was an accident where a car swerved in front of a little group, and a guy went into a barbed wire fence and ripped himself to shreds. The guy got stitched up and continued riding. There are guys who fall, break a collarbone. You know how painful that is. And then they go and ride a bike, and they won't give up. The mental toughness is crazy.
What was the picture of the one guy, again, towards the back of the documentary? He had white medical tape all over. It looked like his face, his nose had exploded. It was flattened out, and he had all this tape, and you could just see that, he was proud that he'd withstood everything that he'd been through, and that he was just not going to quit. What was that picture? Who was that?
That was a rider. I don't want to butcher his name, but everything was something like Bidon or something like that. He was a rider who had a terrible mountain crash. Remember, they had no helmets then. Yeah. The brakes were marginal. Most of the roads were unsealed. We struggled to keep up every day, riding on beautifully manicured roads, beautifully sealed roads. So these guys, they're screaming down mountains, riding essentially like mountain biking, but, down these things with sheer drops, 3,000 feet drops. So this guy just came off, and here's the crazy stat. So the Tour de France has been going since 1903. It stopped a little bit during World War I, stopped a little bit during World War II. But it's this long-standing race, I believe the toughest race on earth. So in 1928, they had the highest attrition rate of any Tour de France in history. 168 riders started, and 42 finished. Now, you think about that. Today, a few riders won't make it, but this race back then, the Tour de France then, where there were 1,000 miles longer than they are today. And I don't want to take anything away from the riders who are riding today because they are extraordinary athletes. However, all I'm going to say was they designed this race so that people wouldn't finish. Right. Today, they design the race so that they have great sprints and they have great finishes and they have great mountains. They don't design the race so people won't finish. But this masochist who came up with the Tour de France, Henri de Grange, his goal of the perfect Tour de France was only one guy gets back to France. That would be his perfect race.
You got to explain to me a little bit of the strategy as far as racing as a team, because these 4 guys took off and they had to ride a boat.
Yes.
A ship.
Yep.
All the way overseas.
One set of rollers on the boat for training.
And they were on that boat or on that ship for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You flew over in 12 hours.
Yep.
Okay, so they get there, so they're supposed to have a support team of 6 extra guys, so they have a 10-man team.
Exactly.
Those guys didn't show up.
Didn't turn up.
Okay, so this is just the 4 of them against the world, and everybody there has a 9 or 10-man team.
Yeah, and here's the crucial part that you bring up. 15 of the 22 stages in 1928 were team time trials, which means instead of it being a mass start where the whole peloton goes out and they race and there are other riders around you that you can draft behind, they were team time trials. What that means is they would start them in either minute increments or 2-minute increments. You're not allowed to draft in a team time trial behind another team. You have to draft behind your team. So 15 of the 22 stages were team time trials. They're 4 guys. So if they shared the work equally, when you're on the front of a peloton, you're doing anywhere upwards of 30% more work sitting on the front. Just because you're pushing air. You're on the front, you've got to go into that headwind, or even without a headwind, even if there's no wind, you're creating wind, you're working about 30% harder than anybody behind. So 4 guys are sharing, let's say it's totally even, and it wasn't, because there were some riders who were doing more work than others. Opperman and Harry Watson were the stronger guys. Let's say it was even, that means that they're doing 25% of the work to get from point A to point B. Now, if you've got 10 guys, that means you can divide it up 10 ways, so you're only doing 10% of the work. Now, that has such a dramatic effect on the energy that you're using up over a 3-week period that everybody, the press, everybody said there's no way that 4 guys have any kind of chance of going up against the best riders in the world when they've got 10 guys. No way in hell. So they defied all odds. And here's the other important thing that you have to remember. The press wrote them off. A lot of the riders wrote them off. But the French people remembered the Anzacs, the New Zealand and Australian soldiers who fought in World War I in France. This is only 10 years after World War I. So 10% of the entire New Zealand population, this is staggering, 10% of our entire population were in France fighting the Germans in World War I.
Wow.
So I have relatives buried in northern France. Most New Zealanders have relatives that died on French soil and dug trenches. And we were, as far as the English were concerned, we were like the working class, low on the totem pole soldiers. If you ever saw that movie Gallipoli, where I lost a number of relatives who were shot down in the surf by the Turks, I mean, it was a massacre, absolute massacre. The French people never forgot that. They never forgot those New Zealand people. And in the film, you'll know that I pay tribute to one of my relatives who went up and over the wall and liberated this little French town. So when the French saw this team, who were these underdogs who came from the other side of the world, not to fight against the Germans, but to take part in this race, the French people got out on the streets with New Zealand and Australian flags and cheered for them.
That's awesome.
And that gave the team this extra oomph, okay, we got this. We're not going to give in. And these guys were stoic in their mental toughness. They just refused to give in. And so that's what really drew me was, wow, how can that story be forgotten? Nobody has, we can't let this story be forgotten.
How did you come upon that book?
Well,
it was called
it was called The Mile Eater.
Mile Eater.
And it was written by the Kennett brothers. And I have to give them credit. Because if it wasn't for them, this film would never have got made. They were digging around, writing up stories about great New Zealand riders. And I had read a number of their books, and I was going through the airport, and I see this red book with this cyclist on it. Never heard of this guy, Harry Watson. So I pick up the book, turn it over. First New Zealander to ride in the Tour de France. What? 1928? I didn't even know we had a guy go in 1928. Britain didn't ride in the Tour until the 50s. America didn't ride in the Tour until the 80s. This is 1928, and some team from New Zealand and Australia go to the Tour? What? So I buy the book. It's a quick read. It's not a big book, but they did all the heavy lifting in terms of identifying this guy. 7-time New Zealand champion, not in the Hall of Fame, never been honored. I have friends who are professional New Zealand cyclists who'd never heard of this guy. I was like, that is despicable. He's from my hometown. And I thought, okay, I am going to find, my wife and I decided that we were going to find a way. She's a producer and great storyteller. We were going to find a way to honor him and make sure he's never forgotten again. So Hubert Opperman, the Australian guy, he was knighted. He was a politician. There are statues of him in Australia. He's been recognized. He was a phenom. He had world records. Yeah. He was amazing. But in New Zealand, in our culture, in that time, and it's still in our sporting culture, any high achievers in New Zealand are expected to always downplay their achievements. You speak to Peter Jackson, people really high achievers from New Zealand, they'll tell you that it's just like expected. We call it the tall poppy syndrome. Imagine a field of poppies, beautiful, even field of poppies in some foreign land, and one poppy grows up in that field of poppies, and it sticks up above all the others. In our culture, somebody comes along and cuts that poppy off, make everything nice and even again. So our New Zealand national rugby team, most successful rugby team, actually the most successful sports team in history, period. Winning percentage in the 70s. Against some teams, it's in the 80s, winning percentage. We very rarely lose. From a population of 4 million, we go beat England, who created the game, of 60 million. We're like we beat Australia. We've won the world, only team in the world to have won the World Cup 3 times. Extraordinary team. But if you ever see an interview with any of the All Blacks after, they could have annihilated another team. They could have broken a world record against another team. They will say, no, it was really nothing. The other team, they really came out. They played hard. They will not talk themselves up because they will get slammed by their fans. We expect everybody to be. So this guy, Harry Watson, becomes the first New Zealander rider to Tour de France, 7-time New Zealand champion, would go to Australia, beat the best in Australia, come back, say nothing to anybody about his achievements. So the papers never picked up the stories. There wasn't like the internet. That's where crazy. Stuff moved around. Yeah. So I went to see Harry Watson's son, 85 years old. He started tearing up because I was telling him stuff about his dad. His dad never told him. He knew nothing about his dad's achievements. And it broke my heart. I was like, how is it? And he died shortly after. How is it that your own son can't even celebrate in your success? Because in our culture, suppress. Don't show off. Don't be a skite. He very rarely lost a race, this guy, Harry Watson. And yet, got to underplay, got to just be cool, don't, show off.
This is the Steve Austin Show.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla from the Adam Carolla Show. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch and bet on games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball as well. BetOnline has NHL, MMA, and championship boxing, all your betting needs in one place. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. So have some fun. Make these games and these events and these combat sports a little more interesting with BetOnline. BetOnline. The game starts here.
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
When we were talking last year at the Broken Skull Challenge compound, and you came out, you were talking about the nutrition of back in the day in 1928, and you covered a little bit of that in the documentary.
Yeah.
Talk about a little bit about the nutrition that those guys were subsisting on back in the day, and also one of the bad habits that they thought was a good habit versus what you were putting in your body in 2013.
Yeah, 2013. Well, it's a really good question. We take it for granted now that we know how to fuel. We know how to hydrate. We know what electrolytes are. I mean, you speak to any kid in high school, they know what electrolytes are. They know what carbs are. They know how to fuel their bodies and prepare for sport. The understanding of nutrition in 1928 was so barbaric. There were people who rode without drinking because they thought, I need to train my body to get used to not drinking. And you probably, you and I are old enough to remember guys who, I come from a working class family in New Zealand, and I remember the old guys, when I was a kid, the old guys would be like, you don't need to drink, don't drink, that's bad for you. You train your body, and your urine would be almost black, Well, their urine was black. They didn't understand about taking in nutrition. They didn't have good nutrition. They had raw eggs, chocolate, bread. Some of them drank wine even. They didn't understand that alcohol was a diuretic and that was actually dehydrating them. That made them feel good. Yeah. And they would do these raids in the towns. They don't have that tradition anymore, but back in the day in the Tour, when your town got picked and the Tour de France came through town, if you got a chance to be raided by the riders who came through town, they wanted you to come in and raid all this stuff. But anyway, so they just didn't understand the idea of nutrition, so they would bonk terribly. And they were riding so far, and they were pushing their body so far. And the other thing they had to deal with was just their immunity getting run down. I mentioned that the roads were unsealed, so all the dust would get in their sweaty clothing. Then that dust would get in between their clothes and the skin. Then it would become like sandpaper. Then it would get sore. Then they would get these infections. And so their immunity is low, and they're getting these infections. And so they just get run down, like totally run down. They wouldn't understand about getting themselves back, into a recovery mode or a recovery drink. They didn't understand any of that.
Well, a lot of guys were smokers because they thought that opened up the lungs.
Well, even President Ronald Reagan used to do commercials for Lucky Strikes. Wasn't it Lucky Strikes?
I can't remember.
But I know it wasn't that long ago that people were saying that smoking was good for you, and yeah, absolutely, that it opened up your lungs. Took a little while for us to get past that whole thing, but there's a famous photograph from 1910 where there's a rider riding with a cigarette. Yeah, they thought it opened up your lungs.
I just can't imagine a guy going through the death stage and gets to the top after 217 miles, and he checks in, and he's just sitting there and inhaling the cigarette after all that. I mean, I can't imagine running 217 miles in a couple of months. That's just me.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely insane. So how did you train for this? Because I want to get back to what you subsisted on.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention one other thing with the nutrition and also the stimulants. Cocaine was legal at that time in the early teens and through all the way. I'm not sure if it was legal in 1928, but it was certainly legal through the teens. They used to take cocaine, and they would put raw cocaine in their eyes to seize the muscles open, because these guys were hallucinating. They were riding to that point where their mind was, they were losing their mind, and they'd somehow managed to find a way to just keep on going. They would take cocaine and butter, and they would rub the cocaine and butter together and rub it on their thighs to stimulate their muscles. They would take caffeine enemas and insert those and get an instant caffeine rush.
You were telling me about that last year, and I had to research that.
Yep.
And because it's the way it's absorbed, it's a much quicker and
absolutely
release
boom
of caffeine. I ain't telling nobody to do that, but
no,
I had to read about that because I'd never heard anything about it once you told me about that.
Yeah, caffeine enemas, and then speed, amphetamines. All of those things were taken and have been taken, not just in cycling. I mean, you go right back, taking stimulants, some performance enhancing drug, it's across all sports going way back. I mean, going back to to Roman times, people would take certain herbs and certain things as a way to stimulate. And I think and then there was early on, there was all kinds of crazy cheating with corks in the mouth and wires tied onto cars and people jumping on trains and because you couldn't track people and then even throwing tacks on the road to give people punctures. That was copied not so long ago in the Tour, and I think it was Cadell Evans if I'm not mistaken, ended up was a victim of that. But the difference with those drugs were, as opposed to the drugs in recent years, was that those drugs were stimulants. Like you take a shot of Red Bull and you go and compete against another athlete, you're caffeinated, you're hyped up, you're in the zone. But your physiology, it doesn't improve your physiology against another athlete. Another athlete could come in with no caffeine and you're not going to have an advantage over him from a physiological standpoint. The difference with a lot of the drugs in recent years is that they have changed the physiology of the rider. So they help with recovery. They help with more red blood cells, oxygenated blood. So people would be doing like blood doping, those sorts of things. That changes the physiology. You're actually now going in and you're changing an athlete's ability to perform. And in the Tour de France, the hematocrit level is restricted to a level of 50. It's just an arbitrary figure that they picked. But when people say, oh, everybody's taking drugs, it's all equal, that's not actually true, because your natural hematocrit might be 48, my natural hematocrit might be 42. But if the limit is 50, you can take drugs and bump your hematocrit from 48 to 50, but your gain is marginal. If I start at 42 and I take drugs and I can go from 42 to 50, my gain is much greater than yours. So at 42 and 48, you and I might have been equal on the road, but now if we change our physiology and I'm getting more of a gain, that's where people, when they say, oh, they were all taking drugs, it's all equal, that's where they're not informed. You have to dig a little deeper.
But, and let me break in here, and you can probably better clarify this than I can. A higher hematocrit level is a thicker blood that allows your blood to carry more oxygen to the muscles.
Exactly.
So that's why you would fight for or strive for the highest hematocrit level, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And so when the guys...
carries more blood to the...
Right.
Carries more oxygen to the muscles.
Exactly. Your oxygenated blood, so more red blood cells. So when a rider goes into the Tour, you should see, or any sporting event over a period of time, you should see a decline in a person's hematocrit level because they're working over a period of weeks. That's why in the Tour de France, it's a race. It really is such a race of attrition because they're getting more and more depleted. And so they say in the Tour, don't burn. You got to be careful when you burn your matches. There's only so many times that you can go out and put out a maximum effort. When the guys go do the Tour of Italy, very rarely can they come back from the Tour of Italy where they're tapping their bodies out for 3 weeks in the Tour of Italy and then come back, and that's in May, and then come back in July and go ride in the Tour. They're still depleted from May. Right. And so there was probably the greatest rider in history was Eddie Merckx. 525 professional wins, if I'm not mistaken. The most successful rider ever. The guy was a phenom. They called him the cannibal because he just ate up races. I mean, the guy was crazy strong. He would do everything you weren't meant to do, and he would attack when you weren't meant to attack, and he'd still win. He was crazy strong. Now, he was a guy that he had some phenomenal ability that other people just didn't have. But yeah, generally speaking, in these modern times with the way people are so on top of the nutrition, everybody has got the best advantage in terms of nutrition.
I still want to get to what you ate, but how did you train for this damn thing?
Okay. So
I know you're an avid cyclist, so you've been cycling forever. You went across America.
Yeah.
But this is a whole different animal, because I would imagine this is 10 times harder than you riding across America.
Yeah, it was way harder and way longer and way more taxing. But the fact that I rode across America hardened me up mentally, because I kind of had a sense of it. I was like, okay, I rode 100 miles a day for 40 days. Now I'm going to ride 150 miles a day on a much heavier bike with no gears up more mountains for 26 days. So I kind of had a measure of it. The hard part was training when I was trying to organize everything, and then I also had I had to shoot a series of races 3 weeks before I went on this tour, so I lost a lot of fitness. You lose your fitness in about 2 weeks. So the training, what was interesting, I trained with a guy called Brady Irwin, and he has a company called Speed of Science. And I'd met him a few years ago, and I explained to him what my schedule was like, and he'd help me when I rode across America. He's an awesome trainer. And he said, look, Phil, you just don't have the time to put in the hours to train for this, so I'm going to have to put you on an extreme short burst training regime. So what he did was he reduced my training hours almost by half of what I trained to ride across America. When I rode across America, I did 1 week once where I rode 36 hours of training. That's not
consecutively?
6 hours a day, okay. 6 days in a row. I did 36, and then I had a rest. And he was doing that to harden me up, mentally and physically. But yeah, 6 hours of training. So he said, I'm going to back it off. You're going to do half the amount of training, but it's going to be unbelievably intense. It's going to hurt like hell. And so there's some new theories now about, particularly as we get older, we can't do the longer hours. Our recovery time is different from when we were younger. So he would give me these rides where they would be shorter, 1.5, 2 hour rides, maybe 2.5 hour rides, where I'd go do drills at maximum effort, so right on threshold. So I went and had my lactate done and worked out where my body started to produce lactate, which was around 168 heart rate. So what I had to go do was do these drills where I would go 12 minutes up a hill with my heart rate sitting on 168, not over, but just right on threshold, just before my body was going into lactate, where I was starting to, you go too far, then you don't get the gains. So you push it right to the edge, right on the edge of your threshold, and do 12 minutes, then rest for 6 minutes, and then do another one, and then rest for 6 and do another 12 minutes, and then rest for 6 and another. So basically 12 minutes, that's 48 minutes of threshold. And you are so tapped. And then the thing on my bike has a watt meter. So I could see my watts at 168 on the first set. I would see a certain number of watts. And then on the next one, I'd still be at threshold, but it'd be slightly down, and it would slowly drop, but maybe by 7, 8 watts.
Right.
And then the next day, I come back, I do exactly the same thing, but 10 minutes, 5 minutes rest, 4 sets. Then the next day, I come back, do 9 minutes with 4 minutes rest, and do those, and 3 days, and then rest, like a recovery ride. Right. And over a period of weeks, I started to see, at the same threshold, doing the same sets, I started to see my watts, my power, go up. And that was the best training that I ever did, and that's what hardened me up.
Well, did you undergo a complete physical before you did this?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about at lactate level, if you're trying to find basically a max heart rate, 220 minus your age, and that was, what you said, 168?
Mine was 168, yeah.
Okay.
So
and you're going right to that?
So I was 46 then, so my math is terrible, but let's say it's 50 would have been 180, right? Would have been my max.
Okay.
So that's about right, because 168 was my threshold, not my max. So I have seen, the most I've ever seen in my max is around 198, somewhere around there on the track.
That's really pushing it on the ticker. Were you wearing a heart rate monitor when you were climbing the Pyrenees or the Swiss Alps?
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, we were maxed out. We were right on the edge.
Would you say, would someone say, or Phil, or did you have something on your wrist?
Yeah, so what we did was we put watt meters on those old bikes. And part of the reason was that we were able to monitor our efforts, because we had to measure that effort out over those 3,338 miles. And so what was interesting was Ben he's a lighter guy. When he is at race weight, And he's an awesome athlete, by the way. This is a guy who at 40 years old got up and ran his first marathon in 3:05. So out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think in his 40s he can run a marathon in like a 2:50. So this is a very fit guy.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, he's a much better climber than me. I mean, he's more suited to climbing. When he's fit and he's a $140 something. I'm 170 something pound guy, and
you're a big cyclist.
I'm a big cyclist. I mean, I'm not anywhere near your size, but for a cyclist, I'm a big guy. It's a lot of weight to pull up the hill. And really, cycling comes down to watts per kilogram. How many watts can you churn out based on how many kilograms you are? And these guys in the Tour de France, they're easily doing, over 6 watts per kilogram. And so Ben is generally a better climber. And then I would venture to say I'm slightly stronger on the flat. I don't know. I mean, but anyway, we balance each other out as riders. We're never waiting for each other. He's great at pacing me up hills. But what was interesting about riding in France was being a heavier rider. When we didn't change our gears and we were pushing a bigger gear, I had more strength and had more weight. I could stomp on a bigger gear than him. So there were some little power climbs where I could actually outclimb him, not because I was a better climber, but just because I could get on top of a gear that he couldn't ride. So interesting fact, if you look at the guys who win the Tour de France, they're very light guys. They've got no arms. I mean, some of these guys, I'm not kidding you, they put their arms in slings to get muscle atrophy in the arms so that they get no muscle.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you. You look at Chris Froome and look at these best riders, the GC riders, the general classification riders. They have no arms, man.
I've noticed that, but
they would get crushed at Broken Skull Ranch. I mean,
all they're trying to do is hang on to the handlebars and pull or push if they need to.
Right. All that weight, like you and I. Well, look at your arms, but this is ridiculous. But even my arm is ridiculous.
Because you don't need that for the task.
You don't need that for the task. And so
great for the beach.
Great for the beach, but not good for riding a bicycle. And so just an interesting point. If you look at how light these guys are, like they might be 135, 140 pound guys. Chris Froome is, I think he's over 6 foot. He is skinny as a rake, but man, can that guy climb? And interesting point, in 1909, I think it was, the guy who won the Tour de France was a guy from Luxembourg. He was 190 pounds.
Wow, that's like a sumo wrestler.
In 1909, he was 190 pounds, and he won because when they got to the hills, he could stand on top of this huge gear. He was a monster of a man, and stand on the gears and go up the hill much further than any of the other guys. So he'd just burn them off. So every pedal stroke, he might be getting, let's say he got 65 inches. They talk about gear inches, which means how far do you go with one revolution of the pedal. So let's say he had a 65-inch gear. He's going 65 inches on every pedal stroke. But let's say some light guy, he's 135, changes the gear, and his pedal stroke, he can only push 45 inches every pedal stroke that big rider goes. So I found when I came back to L.A., I went for a ride with a friend of mine. It was a three and a bit hour ride. It's a ride called TOTS. It's Topanga, Old Topanga, and Stunt. It's got, I don't know how many thousands of feet of climbing. I went for a ride with him. We got back to have coffee, and he said, "Man, do you know what you just did?" And I said, "No." He said, "You just rode your modern bike around TOTS, and you never changed your gears once." I was so happy to be back on this super light bicycle, but I forgot that I had gears. I never changed the gears.
This has been a Podcast One production. Download new episodes of The Steve Austin Show every Tuesday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
This summer, Pluto TV is exploding with thousands of free movies. Summer of Cinema is here. Feel the explosive action all summer long with movies like Gladiator, Mission Impossible, Beverly Hills Cop, Good Burger, and Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Bring the action with you and stream for free from all your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.